Hey everyone, David Ryshpan here again with you on YouTube. This is part 3 in my comping concept series, and today we're finally going to talk about notes. Notes, pitches, intervals, harmony. We're going to look at left-hand rootless voicings and some of the pitfalls I've seen in teaching it over the past 20 years. And we're going to talk all about chords and harmony and what we do when we are comping for ourselves. Left-hand rootless voicings are primarily used for comping for ourselves. If you enjoy the content on this channel, please click like and subscribe. I will link the playlist of all the episodes in this series up there. And I will also put it in the description box below. If you haven't watched the previous 2 episodes, I would definitely bookmark this video, save it to your watch later playlist, and then come back to this after the other 2 videos, because I think we all need a grasp on comping rhythms before we move to the notes. But if you're all up to speed, if you've reviewed everything, let's get into it. So in this type of music, I'm going to talk about 5-note chords, 5-note harmony. And by rootless, I mean that the left hand is not playing the bass note or the root note or the tonic note of the chords. Some people call these Bill Evans voicings. I believe Andy Laverne calls them grips. Anything that goes beyond triadic harmony, you can use these voicings, and I have seen repeated issues come up as we start to think about and address these types of voicing. So that's what I'm going to focus on in this video. So we're dealing with 5-note chords: the root, the third, the fifth, the 7th, and the 9th of each chord. So if I start, I'm going to take our famous 2-5-1 in C major. So those chords would be D minor, G major, and C major. Now when I expand those chords to 5 notes each, so going up to the 9th, that gives me D minor 9, G dominant 9, and C major 9. First of all, the first thing we're going to do is get rid of the bass note. So the bass player is going to play bass. If we're using these voicings in our right hand behind a soloist or behind a singer, our left hand's playing bass. So the bass, the root note of all those chords, is gone. So that leaves us with the one thing I always notice from pianists that get into jazz music from classical music or from pop music, that is how they voice it. They think of a D minor chord and they build up from D. They think of a G chord and they build up from G. It's logical. It's how we're all taught. I'm sure I did it back in the day too when I was younger. But we need to break out of that root-centric habit. So if we just look at the notes that we have, even between the first 2 chords. So D minor 9, F, A, C, E. G9, B, D, F, A. So F and A are common between the 2 chords. So if I just keep F and A wherever I play them, and then I move the other 2 notes, I need a B, well, C can drop to B, and I need D, so E can drop to D. So those 2 chords back to back, and then going from G9 to C major 9, it's the inverse. The B and D are common, and it's my other 2 notes that fall. So one way of thinking about it is that you have two what are called voice exchanges. So your third becomes your seventh. It either is a common tone that changes function, or it falls to the next interval. Your 3 will fall to your 7, and your 7 will fall to your 3, or they're common, right? So we're going from 3, 5, 7, 9 to on G9, 7, 9, 3, 5. So we've basically upended the inversion. If this is 3 and 5 and this is 7, 9, it's basically a wheel or a revolving door, or however you want to think about it. We're constantly flipping back and forth between those two inversions. So we have a voice exchange between 3 and 7, and we have a voice exchange between 5 and 9. And this is why, for you more advanced students who are thinking, why am I not playing a 13th on the dominant chord? I'll get there. But to see the voice leading in action, I think it's much clearer and much easier to literally see on the keyboard and on the staff if we stick to the voice exchanges of 3 and 7 and 5 and 9. If I want to change any note in those voicings, especially on the dominant chord, the G9, or on the major chord, the C major 9, everything follows around that axis. So everything follows around that motor. So if I want to play the 13th or the 6th on the dominant chord, and then I want to play the 13th or the 6th in my major chord, everything else moves in consequence. It doesn't change how the chords move from one to the next. So in that case, I actually have 3 common tones, and the only note that moves is the C to the B. And then the B is actually the single common tone between G9 and C major 9. And if I wanted to play that as C6, 9, the voice leading is still exactly the same. Another issue that comes up from being root-centric players, from learning harmony based off of the bass note, the tonic note, the root note all the time, is that when we first start playing these voicings, well, that looks and can possibly sound like an F major 7 chord. And so you have to trick your brain that that's actually a minor sonority, a minor chord. And what I like to do is bring my right hand over and play the bass note. Or sing the bass note. Da, da. Same thing with the major chord, major 9. Could be construed as E minor 7. Do, do. So it's just about tricking our hands and our brain to feeling those and hearing those as their respective role in a 2-5-1. And so you would practice those voicings in all 12 keys. I like using an exercise where I go down by tone. I might make an entirely separate video on that exercise because it is quite long and involved to explain. But you need to practice them whether you go through the cycle of fifths or whether you go by semitone. You need to get those shapes in all 12 keys and in both inversions. So I call this from the third because I'm starting on the third of D minor 9. And then I could go from the seventh. Etc., etc. This leads me to the next issue, which is range. So while it's important to practice both inversions, in performance and in reality, we're not always going to use both inversions of each voicing. What we want to do is we want to keep the lowest note of our voicing inside of the octave between middle C and the C below. I was taught this as the pinky rule because you want to keep your pinky in that octave. I believe Berkeley calls it the low interval limit, and this applies to arranging as well. So if anyone's getting into arranging for big band, how do you want to voice your trombones and your low saxophones, for example? You don't want, or you want to avoid, let's say, you want to avoid any note below that C being anything other than an octave or a fifth. So if you're putting minor thirds, major thirds down there, they don't speak very clearly. You don't really hear the quality of the chord as clearly as you would in that register, for example. And for trombones, it might be nice to have a really low major 7 chord as an effect. But I would argue 90-95% of the time, that sound is not so useful for the balance of the band. So really getting used to keeping your left hand in this octave of the piano is really key. And so what that requires is that we're going to pivot or bounce or change between the two sets of inversions, or what Andy Laverne calls grips. So if I play the exercise I was talking about of 2-5-1 in major keys going down by whole step, and I start with D minor 9, 2-5-1 in C in this position from the third. My next key would be A flat major, and I'm on the low interval limit. I'm on kind of the lowest extremity of where I can voice a third as the lowest note of my voicing. But now if I go any lower, if I want to play the 2-5-1 to G flat, I have to change positions. So the closest position is not to jump up an octave, but to now voice it starting on the 7th. 7, 9, 3, 5. Now, personally, I kind of reduce the octave even more, and I try to keep it inside of this sixth. So the D below middle C and the B below middle C. That's where I want my pinky to stay. So if I do it that way, I have to pivot more. but that choice is up to every individual player. I think it's a good guideline, middle C and the C the octave below. You also don't necessarily have to play all 4 notes. If you listen to Chick Corea, a lot of his voicings are 3-note voicings. Again, they all revolve around the same voice leading motor as these 4-note voicings. But he's often leaving out the 5th a lot of the time. David Kikoski also does this as well. So if I start on D minor 9, I'm going to leave out the A. And then from there, I might play a G13 shape that is just 7, 3, 13. And then I'll go to a C6, 9 voicing, which is just 3, 6, 9. As opposed to but the same concept of voice leading and voice exchange and pivoting between inversions and all of those considerations are still exactly the same. I'm just playing one less note. I'm going to wrap up the lesson here. I think that covers it for 4-note voicings. If you have any questions, please let me know in the comments. I will do my best to answer them. If you want to review this lesson and the 2 other lessons so far in this series of comping concepts, the playlist will be linked in a card as well as in the description box below. Thank you for watching and listening. My name is David Ryshpan. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.